For a third case study, I'm going to talk about an Asian megacity. And the one I've chosen is the Pearl River, just because I have some working familiarity with it. And that's this river system in southeast China that flows from west to east, and it goes through the city of Guangzhou, which was Canton, is the sort of anglicized version of that, Hong Kong, and Macau, the British and Portuguese colonies, respectively. And it's one of China's great rivers. The headwaters in the Himalayas, and it flows through a large, heavily populated watershed. The estuary supports major cities. The pulsed runoff of freshwater sediments, nutrients, and toxicants lead to water quality degradation, significant habitat alteration and eutrophication from the highly modified hydrology and the massive population pressure. A vibrant economy and engineering capabilities with political will can be transformative. And this is representative of coastal megacities, which are increasing in prominence and in vulnerability. So let's orient ourselves in this river. So, in China we have the Yangtze with the famous Three Gorges Dam, which is mouth is near Shanghai. We have the Yellow River, which is near the mouth is near Beijing, into the Yellow Sea. And in the south we have the Pearl River. So it's much smaller, of course, than the Yangtze or the Yellow River. It doesn't even appear on this map, but this is a map of what they call the Himalayas water tower. And the point there is these huge plateau and mountain ridge system contained 54,000 glaciers. It's the biggest hunk of ice other than Antarctica and North Pole, storing huge amounts of fresh water and creating these massive river systems, the Indus and the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, which support 1.3 billion Indians essentially, and then the Yellow, Yangtze, and Pearl, which support 1 billion plus Chinese, and the Mekong as well. So these are big rivers, and because they have year-round, abundant, reliable water flow, they sustain these populations, these huge populations. And this is sort of the highlands in the dark color, and then the river itself that flows from these highlands down to the coast. And both India and China have taken advantage of these giant rivers because they provide reliable fresh water, but also lots of nutrients to support crops to grow food for rice in China in particular for their large populations. So down at the estuary, we end up with the river delta down here, and this enclave, the British enclave of Hong Kong, formerly British enclave of Hong Kong, which is now in China's hands, and Guangzhou, the large city up here at the top of the estuary, and then the smaller Macau, the Portuguese colony here, famous for its casinos and gambling. So what happens in this is got this Himalayas, you got this big floodplain with lots of ag occurring, lots of industry down in Canton and Hong Kong, and these inputs of nutrients, sediments, toxicants that come into the coastal waters. So they have high biodiversity. This is subtropical climate. It's got lots of sediment accretion and vast mangrove beds. They've got large ponding where they're doing aquaculture, both in the watershed and down on the coast. And they have a history of creating and managing these watersheds. It's a place of significant frequent disturbance. This is the typhoon tracks of typhoon is a hurricane in the North Pacific, and you can see and there are cyclones south of the equator in the Pacific, and all the same thing. These massive storms that track through and create devastation. That's the other big ecological impact of this area are the fact that they're making so many dams. So China has actively lots of dams under construction. The Pearl River is not quite as much as the Yangtze, but there are 16 large dams under construction. And so they're increasingly in the Mekong, they're going to do a whole lot of dams. So not just for hydropower, but for flood protection and irrigation and promote development. Down at the mouth, there's the regular occurrence of red tides in the Hong Kong harbor there, causing fish kills and human-related impacts. One of the things that's happened in the watershed in this region, are these this ancient dike pond aquaculture where they had pigs and crops, and then a pond with ducks and fish. And what they've done is they've converted those to shrimp ponds, and so there's no land associated. So you can see from this photograph, it's all shrimp ponds, and it's heavily fertilized and intensive aquaculture production in these ponds. They're trying to do some things at some scale. This is a little waterway that they took us to that was running down from one of their small cities that only had 3 million people, and then they diverted the water through this wetland, that artificial wetland, that was able to reduce the nitrogen, phosphorus, suspended sediments, and biological oxygen demand quite significantly. Tragically, though, they just put it back into the river that they had diverted it from, but most of the river water didn't go diverted through the wetlands, so it didn't really have a net impact on the water quality. But they did show that they could scale up this kind of situation. So one of the things I think is kind of exciting about places like China, if they put their mind to something, they can do a whole lot, and they can do it quickly. And if they want to define a responsibility for management, they can make this happen. And I've seen it. They won a river prize in the Shaw River a few years ago, where they took 250,000 people, relocated them. They were in some slums along the riverbank. Then created a really nice river amenities along the riverbank with natural filtration going on, so the water quality is improved, and then the people came back in a better environmental situation. Of course, some people that got moved didn't get the benefit of some of those advantages. But anyway, it does provide potential to meet these different challenges with a bunch of different recommendations that we've put together here for coastal megacities. So I wanted to give you a feel for that, how the world's changing. I mean, it's not just that, China's got a large population, or India, but within those countries there's this migration, internal migration, and as well as in North America and Europe. So here's the number of coastal megacities in 1950, really two. That was New York City and Tokyo. And then as in 20-year increments, you can see a bunch more medium-sized cities popping up, a couple more megacities, and Sao Paulo and Rio, and then a bunch of Indian cities. And by 2010, you can see a smattering of these coastal megacities occurring everywhere. And if you just project this out to 2030, you can see these Asian megacities, India and China, Indonesia, just blossoming. And so even now we can see a large impact of these megacities. So these megacity issues are going to become issues of the future, something that we have to wrestle with. And one of the problems with these megacities is they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to the fact that you've got these 10+ million. We define a megacity by 10 million plus are concentrated in this area, and they get transportation to deliver goods and products to and from these cities. But they need energy, they need water, they need food, and they need ways of moving those things around. And so if you cut off the water supply, or contaminate it, or the food supply, or disrupt the energy grid, it causes great stress to tens of millions of people and can have immediate and devastating consequences. So you know, as we harden the shorelines and overfish the stocks offshore, you just decrease the resilience of these ecosystems to bounce back. We can see human health impacts. I'll give you a case study of that in a second. And that was when I was there in 2000. When was it? 2003, was it? What's the date on that? Anyway, I was there when SARS came out. And I mean, I was at ground zero. Look at that wetland that I showed. That's where and when the SARS epidemic was initiated. And in retrospect, they found out they were getting it from these cat-like creatures jumping from the cat to the human, killing people in China, but also in Canada and North Carolina. And it's right next to this new megacity, Shenzhen, which was right adjacent to Hong Kong on the mainland side. Less than 20,000 people back in 1979. By 2003, when I was there, it was 8 million people, and it was projected to be over 10 million shortly after. I've never seen it's explosive growth. It's not fast growth. It's explosive growth. They're building this stuff as fast as they can, and a lot of migration internally for, and interestingly, smart young women had to leave their husbands behind, and they would go in this kind of special economic zone. So, you know, China was just keen on developing as quickly as possible. So integration, very little regional synthesis, largely isolated studies. There's not much NGO or academic integration activity that I could see. Most of the national tensions on the Yangtze, the Three Gorges Dam, or the Yellow River with their delta alterations and the Habs offshore. Pearl River has gotten very little national attention. Adaptive management, hard for me to discern. Not a single regulatory authority for the management of the river. Little progress that I could see on issues like the harmful algal blooms or the human health impacts of water quality. Women were not supposed to breastfeed in Hong Kong because of, I think it was dioxin contamination levels were so high. So basically, I can't imagine they're managing anywhere near an adaptive way. Precautionary, little consideration. Ongoing degradation, seems the economy trumps everything. The burden of proof is on the science and the management, and the development pressures still are booming along. For sustainability, I think the vulnerability, like that SARS outbreak demonstrates, severely vulnerable. Response to typhoon damage demonstrates some social resilience, so they have had typhoons, and they do seem to be able to rebuild after that, but don't know about the ecological resilience. And in terms of resources, I have a paper on coastal megacities that you can look at, and then I recommend this short TED Talk about debunking third world myths with the best stats you've seen by Hans Rosling. He just died a week or two ago, and was one of the iconic, one of the first TED Talks that really went viral. And I recommend it because it's just a really good talk. But it talks about this China model of development, growth of gross national product, and how they could really change their trajectory. So that's it for that case study.